Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
What a pleasant day we have! Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all having a nice day. Today, every day, have a good day. My name is Kenneth Velasco, one of the members of Group 6, and my companion for today, who is also leading this podcast with me. When you hear his name, you already know the drill. Please welcome Mr. John Henry Marasigan.
Oh, good morning, Mr. Velasco. Thank you for introducing me.
Well, Mr. Marasigan. I know this topic will make you interested. You know why? Because this is the topic that we're talking about last night. We're about to discuss the balance of power politics in the age of reason in the year of 1715 to 1789. Interesting.
You mean we're gonna talk about history, buddy?
Yup, that's right, partner. We're gonna talk about history. That's why we prepared a visual presentation. Further, we can briefly discuss our topic for today. So, let's begin. The period from 1715 to 1789 was one of transition between the religious wars of the 1500s and the early 1600s and the wars of nationalism and democracy, starting with the French Revolution. This was also the era of balance of power politics, where Europe operated as an integrated system, so that one state action would trigger reaction from all the other states, right? As a result, it was hard for one state to gain an overwhelming position in Europe without everyone else, in particular Britain, ganging up to restore the balance. Finally, it was a period of intense competition between European states, a competition that would launch Europe into the two bloody centuries in all human history. So the next topic is the diplomatic maneuvering, 1715 to 1740. The death of Louis XIV in 1715 ended the bloodiest and most exhausting period of warfare up to that point in European history, partner. The scale of bloodshed and expenditure was so massive that it would take several years before Europe would be ready for another major war. However, mutual distrust kept the various powers eyeing each other suspiciously and constantly maneuvering to maintain a stable or superior position in case war did break out. Spain and Austria conspired to take Gibraltar from England, causing Britain and France to ally to stop this plot. Britain, Austria, and Holland signed the Barrier Treaty in 1718, by which Austria got the Spanish Netherlands in return for manning the barrier fortress against French aggression. Because of this maneuvering, or maybe in spite of it, peace ruled over most of Europe for nearly 2 decades. Again, partner, for nearly 2 decades. Alright, the rise of Prussia. Since the late 1600s, Prussia had been quietly but steadily gaining strength under Frederick William the Great, Elector, and his grandson Frederick William the First. Prussia evolved from a small war-ravaged principality to a highly centralized independent kingdom. Imagine, it evolved from a small war-ravaged principality to a highly centralized independent kingdom. How good was that, partner? The two pillars of Prussian strength were a highly disciplined and efficient army and bureaucracy. Prussia was a poor country, and Frederick William I did an amazing masterful job of making the most from the least. Alright, he make it from the most of the least. So, he did a masterful job. He cut his organization down the middle, cut the pay rates of the leftover government employees into equal parts, excused the vast majority of his castle stock, sold a lot of his furnishing and royal gems, and surprisingly, persuasively set drifters to work. Disregarding this tactical development rather, Frederick William I followed a quiet international strategy and left his child, Frederick II, both an enormous arm and force and full depository. The War of the Polish Succession, 1733 to 1739. This is the first major disturbance, partner. You know why? Because this is the death of the Polish king. The death of the Polish king led to rival claims by French and Austrian candidates, and these claims led to war. Austria and its ally, Russia, being closer to Poland, emerged victorious over France and Spain. The only compensation was that the Spanish Bourbons got control of southern Italy and Sicily. The War of Polish Succession symbolized the growing importance of Eastern and Central Europe in diplomatic affairs. In fact, events surrounding two of these states, Prussia and Austria, would dominate European affairs for much of the 18th century. So let's move in. The War of the Austrian Succession, 1740 to 1748. By the way, partner, this is the part that the story go interesting. More interesting. Frederick I's returned toward the rich province of Silesia, then under Habsburg rule. The timing could not have been better for Prussia. Austria was in pitiful shape to fight a war, having just lost a disastrous struggle with the Ottoman Turks. Its generals and ministers were old men past their prime, while the administration was full of corruption and confusion. Imagine that. And to make matter worse, the old Emperor Charles VI had just died, leaving only a young woman named Maria Theresa. Charles had gotten most of Europe rulers to sign the Pragmatic Sanction. This is a document recognizing Maria Theresa as the lawful heiress, but many question the legality of Maria Theresa and her husband taking the throne, and set up the Elector of Bavaria as an alternative candidate. This was the situation for the unfortunate Maria Theresa, who was also pregnant when Frederick invaded Silesia. However, as Frederick William I had warned the young Frederick, wars were generally much harder to end than to start. This is true. And this one did not stop at Silesia. France, Spain, Bavaria, and Saxony all joined Prussia, hoping to pick Austria clean. Austria's allies, which is Russia, was neutralized when Sweden joined the other side against it. The left Britain, who was already involved in a war and with Spain, take over control of the West Indies trade. Britain, which generally tried to maintain the balance of power and its trade back in Austria. Unfortunately for Austria, Britain had a small army and was mainly concerned with defending George II's Principality of Hanover from neighboring Prussia. As if Frederick William I had been a prophet, a simple move into Silesia had triggered what amounted to a global conflict with fighting in India and American colonies as well as Europe. Mollwitz, the first battle of the War of the Austrian Succession, was a bit embarrassing for Frederick. His army won, but not until he had run prematurely from the field. After that, however, he showed a flair for brilliant generalship and decisive movement that were unequaled until Napoleon some 50 years later. Frederick's victory at Mollwitz left him with a lower Silesia and left Maria Theresa, who had just given birth to a son somewhat destitute. However, the young queen showed that she had some spirit to fight of her own. She rallied the Hungarian nobles to her side, raised an army, and secured an alliance with England. Next, she made a secret trust with Frederick, giving him Lower Silesia if he would drop out of the war. Then, she surprised everyone by invading Bavaria and throwing her enemies, now without Frederick off balance. With Austria fortune restored, the war dragged on for 8 more years. Frederick would occasionally re-enter the war, revive his allies with his brilliant leadership, and then be bought off with more Silesia. At last, bloodshed and exhaustion led to the Peace of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748. Frederick kept Silesia while Maria Theresa had survived and saved the rest of her empire. However, she was burning for revenge against Frederick. Alright, that's the War of the Austrian Succession. Well, everything turns out of place after the War of Austrian Succession. This may cause a new diplomatic revolution, which, alright, please welcome Mr. Henry. Mr. Henry will discuss.
The Diplomatic Revolution of 1756. The administration, the funds were reorganized, and the army was developed. A partner who can help her Ras Frederick retain the East while endangering Russia and Prussia. Two conflicts have undermined the Australian-Russian partnership on condition that he was further attacked from the west and faced 3 frontal conflicts. The choice of partner was between France and the United Kingdom. France, a traditional partner, was lazy, agreed to the land handover to the west and paid the Russian army. Eliminate the dangers of the military. Both west and east routes on behalf of Russia. That I was there, Frederick felt that Russia couldn't fight without British money. He also felt that France would do so, therefore, France joined Austria and agreed support Russia efforts to tackle conflict. This ended the 250-year conflict between France. The 7-Year War 1756 up to 1763. Conflict practice in the Prussian troops encashed with Hanover and killing conflict and homecoming. Faced with 3 frontal battles, Frederick had to start its rise in position and completely withdraw Russia from the conflict. Keep Frederick in conflict and divert money and hand over, the part of his system. The partition of Poland. Russia has become a colossal statue, and Poland collapsed under the weight of large aristocrats, and which suffered 1771 Russia. Prussia, I was tied from the 7 Years' Wars until the Warsaw Pact collapsed in Poland in 1989. The American Revolution. The American War for the Independence was the final major event in the West before the French Revolution. Britain, the big colonial power, found itself gauged up on by France. Spain and Holland. In Europe, this conflict had 2 significant outcomes. First, it bankrupted France, which sparked the revolution. And second, it established a democratic republic which many saw as a model for their own revolution. So now, partner, what can you say about what we discussed today on our podcast?
Alright, partner. To be honest, I am so speechless at this moment. But I am so grateful. Why? It's so much great in here. Why? Because imagine studying this whole history with using this podcast.
Partner, I have learned a lot from this history between countries and the past and many events after the baggage disappearance of history.
Thank you everyone for listening, and I think this ends our podcast. Once again, have a good day. My name is Kenneth Velasco.
And I'm John Henry Marasigan. Group 6 is now